You wake up in a cold, damp room that smells like mildew, sheep tallow, and long-forgotten regrets. The walls are made of something generously called stone, though it might actually just be compressed disappointment. Your bed is a sack of straw that hasn't been fluffed since the last plague, and your pillow is a rolled-up tunic stuffed with whatever was dead nearby. Welcome to the medieval workshop/living space/protoshed. It's the year 1273, and your hammer is broken. Which is honestly a problem, because if your hammer is broken, you might as well be too. There's no Amazon Prime, no customer service hotline, no returns policy. Just you, your broken tool, and a society that thinks duct tape is sorcery and WD-40 is probably a demon. Now, before you get too comfortable, yes, I know the straw mat is doing wonders for your posture. Take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps a lot. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how many fellow sleep-deprived insomniacs around the world are joining me in this slow spiral into historical irrelevance. Anyway, back to your broken hammer. You see, in the Middle Ages, tools weren't just tools. They were friends, partners. Sometimes they were your only inheritance. If you were a blacksmith, a carpenter, a cobbler, or just some guy pretending to know how to make things, your tools were your ticket to survival. So when one broke, you didn't just toss it and grab another. That would be wasteful. And medieval people didn't waste things. Not because they were eco-conscious, but because they were poor. Like, eat turnip skins for dinner poor. If a chisel cracked, you didn't cry about it. You reshaped it into a smaller chisel. If your axe lost its edge, you sharpened it until it became a knife. If the knife broke, congratulations, you now own the world's most inconvenient paperweight. And if your hammer handle snapped in half, you cut a tree branch with your broken knife, shaved it down with your sad, blunted chisel, and fashioned a new handle while muttering the medieval equivalent of, "Why does everything I love betray me?" There were entire repair economies in medieval towns. People whose only job was to fix broken things. The tinker, for example. Not to be confused with a modern-day software engineer. A tinker was a wandering tool medic, showing up at your door like a medieval mechanic. No van, no invoice, just a sack of mystery tools and maybe a loose understanding of metallurgy. And if you were lucky, they'd even fix your pot without cursing your entire bloodline. But let's zoom in on your situation. You're a woodworker in a small village in what is technically England but feels more like mud. You were building a new door for the local church, a structure so holy it leaks from 6 different directions. And just as you were about to drive the final iron nail, your hammerhead slipped off the handle and landed on your foot, which is now swollen, probably broken, and entirely your fault. No NHS, no urgent care, just a sheep bladder full of fermented herbs and a friend who once saw someone wrap their leg in moss. Medieval medicine, everyone. You hobble to your workbench. It's more splinters than wood. Your hands are covered in calluses. Your nails are black with soot. And your only light source is a tallow candle that smells like anxiety. You stare at your broken hammer like it's the ghost of productivity. This hammer was forged by your grandfather, whose idea of quality control was if it doesn't explode, it's good. But it's been with you through every door, table, and accidental injury for a decade. Throw it away? Absolutely not. That hammer has more personality than most nobles. So, you do what any sensible person does. You start the long, boring, uncomfortable process of fixing it. Step 1. Find a new handle. This means walking into the nearby forest, which is less a forest and more a lawless expanse of trees, bandits, and wolves with anxiety issues. You carry a tiny knife for protection, which in a medieval context means you'll die slightly slower. After about an hour of limping through mud and apologizing to squirrels, you find a branch that doesn't scream, "I'll snap," immediately. Step 2. Whittle the branch into a handle. You sit on a rock. It's cold. Everything is cold. Your clothes are wet. You smell like wet linen and regret. You slowly carve the branch with your pathetic knife, one sliver at a time, while your foot throbs like it's composing medieval poetry. Time has no meaning anymore. Somewhere, a rooster crows, and you're not sure if it's morning or a very ambitious hallucination. Eventually, you jam the new handle into the hammerhead and bind it with a bit of rawhide. It holds. Sort of. The balance is off, and it feels like swinging a brick tied to a stick, but hey, It's a hammer again. And in medieval terms, that's basically a miracle. Repair wasn't just common, it was necessary. Tools weren't mass-produced. They were handmade, often custom, and weirdly sentimental. You didn't just use your father's tools, you inherited his splinters. They passed down like heirlooms, except instead of gold, you got a rusty plane and some unresolved emotional trauma. When your side dulled, you sharpened it with a whetstone that had been passed down so many generations it was basically a family member. When your shovel cracked, you repaired it with iron straps and prayers. When your spinning wheel fell apart, you tied it together with leather cords and convinced yourself it was rustic. Let's talk about blacksmiths, the MVPs of broken tool repair. These were the people who actually knew what they were doing, unlike you, the enthusiastic amateur. A blacksmith could take a bent iron tool and straighten it with fire and rage. They'd heat it, hammer it back into shape, and reforge it like it owed the money. A good blacksmith could stretch the lifespan of a single tool across 3 generations and 8 revolts. But going to a blacksmith wasn't always easy. They were expensive. Not expensive like skip the latte expensive, expensive like sell a goat expensive. And if your goat's your only source of milk, you better hope your cousin's cousin knows how to fix an anvil with hope and wire. Also, you couldn't just walk to the smithy. You had to hobble there on your busted foot, carrying the broken remains of your self-esteem in a sack. The village path is mud, the weather is some flavor of rain, and your only footwear is a pair of deformed leather boots that squeak like haunted mice. No Uber, just sandals and blisters. Now, let's be clear. Not all tool repairs were successful. Sometimes, you made things worse. You ever tried to fix a barrel hoop with iron wire only to find out you've basically invented a medieval catapult? Happens more than you'd think. Or tried to patch your water bucket with wax and ended up flooding your own cellar? Congratulations, you've invented indoor plumbing failure. And don't forget about the guilds. Oh, the guilds. Medieval trade unions with extra judgment and a side of bureaucracy. If you were part of a guild, you had access to repair networks, shared tools, and standardized methods of not dying. But joining a guild was harder than getting a job today without 5 years of experience in an entry-level role. You had to apprentice for years, learning every tool, every repair method, and every way to scowl at people who use cheap wood. Your master would berate you for the way you filed your saw teeth. They're too sharp, he'd say. Tools should be intimidating, not lethal. And then he'd send you to clean the forge with a broom that somehow also needed fixing. But let's talk about materials. Metal was expensive. Iron was treated like treasure. Steel? That was luxury grade. So if a tool broke, every little shard mattered. Broken side blade? Melt it down. Broken plowshare? Weld a patch. Broken horseshoe? Reuse the iron for nails. Nothing went to waste. Even broken nails were hammered straight again and reused. Because a nail wasn't just a nail, it was a tiny piece of privilege. And remember, if you really couldn't fix something, you bartered. Trade your broken hammer for a half-used spade. Or swap 3 cracked chisels for 1 decent axe head. It was like a medieval flea market where everything smelled like goats and nobody had change. And if all else failed, you prayed. Literally. There were saints for this. Saint Eligius was the patron saint of metalworkers and tool fixers. You'd light a candle in the church and whisper, "Please, Saint Eligius, don't let my saw break again. I don't want to shave wood with a spoon." Now, as you sit there, cradling your freshly repaired hammer like it's your firstborn child, you take a deep breath. The candle flickers. The wind howls outside. You realize you spent the entire day fixing one tool. But you're proud, tired, aching, possibly developing trench foot, but proud. Because in the Middle Ages, nothing was simple. Everything broke. Everything was painful. And fixing a tool wasn't just maintenance, it was survival. A reminder that even when everything falls apart, you can slap it back together with some twine, some fire, and a complete disregard for safety. You hang your hammer back on the wall. It clinks softly against a dozen other tools, each with its own story, its own splinter past, and its own battle scars. You lie back on your mattress. It smells like betrayal. But you don't mind. Because tomorrow, something else will break. And you'll fix that, too. Eventually, you wake up again, Though wake up is a generous term for regaining consciousness after 5 hours of mildly shivering under a blanket that feels like it was woven from disappointment and old horsehair. Your back hurts. Your foot still throbs. And your repaired hammer is staring at you from the corner like it's daring you to ruin something else today. There is no coffee. There is no cereal. There is barley mush, which is just warm sadness in a bowl. You eat it slowly, spoon carved from a bit of horn, trying to ignore the faint crunch of grit in every bite. Congratulations, you've just chewed your way through the full medieval breakfast experience. Delicious. Now today's disaster is brought to you by your saw. Specifically, the teeth of your saw, which have decided they no longer wish to participate in this whole cutting things lifestyle. You try to slice through a plank and it squeals like a dying weasel. That's how you know it's time to sharpen the blade. But where's the sharpening file? Ah, yes. You lent it to your neighbor, who swore he'd return it last week. He didn't. And now you get to do the very medieval thing of walking half a mile to his house to either retrieve your file or make vague threats using the universal weapon of the age, passive-aggressive sighing. You step outside. The air is damp, as if the sky forgot to rain properly. Everything is mud. Your boots squelch with every step, sucking at your soul. Your neighbor's hut is slightly more lean-to than house. Chickens scatter as you approach, possibly plotting your downfall. You knock. He answers. Smells like onions and bad decisions. Classic. You get your file back. It's rusted. He says, I think it was like that already. You nod, as if that's not the most offensive thing you've heard all year. But this is how life goes. Tools break, you fix them, and sometimes they come back worse than they left. A bit like your emotional stability. Now, sharpening a saw is not a thrilling task. It's repetitive. It's slow. It's the kind of thing you do while reconsidering every decision that's brought you here. You sit at your bench. The candle flickers. You set the blade in your lap and begin. File. Stroke. File. Stroke. There's a rhythm to it. Like some kind of slow-motion death song. You have to hit each tooth just right, give it the right angle, the right edge, or the saw will punish you with crooked cuts and endless frustration. You get into a trance. Time slips. Your hands move automatically. Outside, the rain has finally committed to its performance. It drums on the roof like a bored toddler with a stick. Eventually, the teeth are sharp again. Not good sharp. Not new sharp. But medieval sharp. Which means the blade will now saw through wood and maybe part of your hand if you're not careful. Perfect. But that's just the saw. Next, it's your adze. You were shaping some beams yesterday when you noticed the edge had gone blunt. Again. This happens because metal quality in your time period is, let's be honest, bad. Not wrought iron bad. More like it technically has iron in it bad. So you put the adze to the whetstone. Which means you drag out the giant, awkward, circular block of stone that's been soaking in a barrel of murky water for the last week. The water smells like old shoes and something that might once have been a frog. You pretend it's fine. You brace the stone, grab the adze, and begin the delightful task of manually grinding metal, one grit-filled stroke at a time. Now if you're wondering what this feels like, imagine dragging a heavy object over sandpaper while being slowly drained of your will to live. That's sharpening, medieval style. No sparks. No machines. Just friction, patience, and the overwhelming sense that nothing in life will ever be easy again. Eventually, you finish. The edge is usable. Your hands are gray from metal dust. Your sleeves are soaked. Your nose is running. You wipe it on your shirt, which is also your only shirt. Medieval hygiene, everyone. Let's pause for a moment here and appreciate just how absurdly resourceful medieval people had to be. There was no such thing as just buy another one. Every tool was fixed, repurposed, reforged, or absorbed into a weird drawer of maybe one-day parts. You didn't throw away a cracked iron spoon. You melted it down into a nail. You didn't discard a broken needle. You straightened it and pretended it was still good. This is how we ended up with the glorious invention of the mendicant tinker. A walking Swiss army knife of a person. These guys roamed the countryside like tool-based missionaries, knocking on doors and offering to fix your pans, kettles, shears, and dignity. They carried bags of metal scraps, wire, rivets, and tiny anvils. Their repair techniques were 50% skill, 30% improvisation, and 20% holding things together with tension and a prayer. They'd set up shop outside your house, fix your pot with a heated rod, a bit of tin, and what looked suspiciously like hope, then ask for payment. You'd offer coins, or food, or if you were broke, a promise to pay later, which was medieval code for I will avoid you for the next year. But not all repairs were done with tools. Sometimes the tools were the repairs. Take the humble plowshare. It broke constantly. Because surprise, dragging a wedge of metal through rock-filled earth isn't gentle work. So when it cracked, you didn't just replace it. You reshoot it. Like a horse. You'd find a smith who'd reforge the point, patch the crack, or bolt a new tip on using crude but effective methods. And if it broke again, you repeated the process until you ran out of metal or willpower. Let's talk about nails. Nails were sacred. You didn't lose a nail. That was a felony in some workshops. Every bent nail was hammered back into shape, even if it was more benign than fastener. Some medieval houses have walls held together entirely by reused nails, sticky mud, and the structural integrity of pessimism. Now imagine this. You're trying to build a bench. Not because you want to sit comfortably, you've never known comfort, but because the church is demanding extra seating for some religious ceremony involving lots of incense and judgment. You grab your tools. Hammer, mostly functional. Saw, grudgingly sharp. Chisel, yes. The chisel. Or what used to be a chisel, before it snapped in half while you were carving out a mortise joint and cursing under your breath. Do you throw it out? Of course not. You take it to the forge, if you have one, or more likely, you heat it over your tiny hearth like some kind of iron witch. Once it's red hot, you clamp it in a pair of tongs that were probably once pliers, and you hammer the broken edge flat. Then you grind it, re-edge it, polish it if you're feeling fancy. And now, you don't have a chisel. You have a smaller chisel. And if you keep repeating this process, eventually you'll have a nail pick. Or a conversation starter. Medieval people repurposed everything. A broken side blade could become a draw knife. A snapped pitchfork tine became a skewering stick. Broken handles became wedges. And broken wedges became firewood. Nothing was truly broken, just downgraded in the hierarchy of usefulness until it found its place in the world. Kind of like interns. And this brings us to the unsung heroes of tool repair, the women. Because while you were out in the mud cursing your hands and fixing your hammer with half a shoelace, your wife was in the kitchen fixing her own nightmare, the cooking tools. Iron cauldrons cracked under heat stress. Skimmers bent. Ladles warped. And guess who fixed them? Not the smith. Not the tinker. Her. With wire, leather, and terrifying ingenuity. The same hands that churned butter and birthed 6 children also refitted the kitchen knives and repaired the broken spinning wheel with some dowels, spit, and divine intervention. Even children were not spared. They played with toys made from tool scraps. Broken spoon handles became dolls. Bits of worn leather became balls. Discarded iron rings were turned into makeshift games involving sticks, danger, and zero supervision. Everything had a second life. And when things couldn't be repaired, you stored them anyway. In a box, a bag, a shelf, just in case. Medieval workshops were full of mysterious piles of iron bits, wooden shavings, and nails that may or may not still work. You never threw them out. You just hoped they'd become useful eventually. Spoiler, they never did. So as night falls and your candle burns low, you look around at your little shop. Every tool has scars. Every blade has a history. And every repair has made them uglier, stranger, more personal. You slide your newly sharpened saw into its place on the wall. The hammer sits beside it. The adze, the chisel, the file, all resting. They're tired, like you. But they're ready for tomorrow. Because in the medieval world, nothing stays whole for long. But broken things don't end. They evolve. They adapt. They keep going. And so do you. You wake up to the sound of something falling. A dull metallic thud, followed by a gentle cascade of wooden objects toppling over like a domino game invented by someone with too much time and a poor grasp of gravity. You open your eyes. It's still dark. Not twilight dark. Black as a coal cellar dark. The kind of darkness that's less about the absence of light and more about the medieval economy refusing to afford you more than half a candle stub. You sit up, heart pounding from the sound, but also from the intense athletic effort of rising from what might generously be called a hay mattress. Mostly, it's an uneven pile of prickles and regrets. You fumble for your lamp. You knock it over. You swear softly, then louder. You relight it using a flint, a bit of scorched linen, and some of your remaining optimism. The flickering flame reveals the culprit. Your tool shelf has given up on existence. The back bracket, probably held in by one of those charmingly reused nails from your last attempt at woodcraft, has torn free of the wall. Your chisels lie scattered across the floor like tiny, pointy corpses. Your workbench is buried under a pile of broken bits. The room smells like dust, metal, and betrayal. You sigh, deeply, existentially, the kind of sigh that echoes back from the rafters and maybe, just maybe, alerts God that you're not enjoying this particular storyline. You spend the next hour cleaning up, sorting what's still intact, rebending what's not. You find your gouge chisel, handle cracked straight through. The leather grip? Gone. You make a mental note to cut a strip from your belt. It's not like your pants are doing that great a job staying up anyway. Then you see it. The splintered remains of your square. The square. The tool that lets you measure right angles. You stare at it. It stares back. Bent. Fractured. Useless. You try to fix it with a gentle bend. It makes a noise like a dying cricket and collapses completely. And here begins your latest adventure in medieval repair, where every broken tool is both a task and a test of your sanity. So you drag yourself back into the daylight. By which I mean, you push open your door and are immediately hit by the glorious medieval weather forecast, damp with a chance of more damp. You walk to your neighbor's hut, again, because he's got something you need, a compass. Not the kind that finds north. No, this compass is for drawing circles, arcs, and despair. You borrow it, promising to return it before it rusts over. Again. Now, with the compass and a new chunk of salvaged scrap wood, you begin crafting a new square. Because nothing is sacred, and everything is a candidate for reincarnation. You saw the wood to size. Carefully. Slowly. Because your saw, while sharpish, still has a slight curve to it that makes every straight cut a philosophical debate between mon and metal. You sand it. With your version of sandpaper, which is literally sand, on a rough cloth, rubbing grain against grain like some kind of medieval exfoliation ritual. Once the arms of the square are ready, you fix them together with pegs and glue made from boiled hooves. Yes, hooves. Real glue. Smells like something crawled out of a medieval cauldron and begged for death. But it holds. You whisper a quiet threat to the glue. It squelches. You pretend that's normal. A few hours later, you have a square. A new one. Not quite symmetrical. Slightly crooked. But in the spirit of medieval carpentry, that means it's finished. You test it on a beam. It's fine. Not perfect. But that's okay. Nothing in your world is perfect. Especially not tools. And here's the thing. Perfection wasn't really the goal. Function was. Your house isn't square. Your windows don't shut properly. And your entire village has a charming tilt that historians will one day call rustic charm, but you know is just because everyone built with slightly warped tools and not enough daylight. Medieval people learned to work with the flaws. You didn't replace your tools because they were imperfect. You worked around them. You adapted. If your saw had a wobble, you adjusted your cut. If your chisel was too short, you changed your grip. If your square was off by 2 degrees, well, your wall just leaned a little. That was fine. Most of your body was leaning a little too. And so we come to one of the most important, if slightly depressing, facts of medieval craftsmanship. Everything was fixed until it couldn't be. Then it was turned into something else. Let's talk about handles. Tool handles break all the time. You'd think a shovel handle could last through a season of digging. But no. If the wood is dry, it splinters. If it's wet, it rots. If it's neither, it probably gets eaten by bugs. Congratulations. You now need a new handle. Again. So you search for a good piece of wood. Not just any wood. You need something strong, flexible, willing to live a second life as part of your suffering. Ash is good. Oak is better. Willow if you're desperate. You carve it slowly, shaving splinters with a draw knife that looks like it was forged by an angry blacksmith with no thumbs. You fit the new handle. It's never quite snug. There's always a little give. So you wedge it with slivers of bark or hammer it with a wooden mallet that's more splinters than mallet. You wrap the end in leather, or twine, or hope, and once again, your shovel lives for a few more months until it breaks again. It always breaks again. Let's not forget the joyous world of tool storage. There's no toolbox in the modern sense. There's a bucket, a crate, maybe a bag made from repurposed sheep hide. The tools jangle together like a choir of angry goblins. Every time you reach in, there's a 50% chance you'll get stabbed by something rusty. You keep going anyway. And sometimes, you get creative. That broken scythe? Recurve it, mount it on a short pole, and congratulations, you've invented a crude machete. That ruined knife blade? Sharpen one edge, flatten the other, wedge it into a split stick, and there you go, a makeshift plane for smoothing wood. It doesn't really smooth anything, but it tries. There's something beautiful in the ugliness of all this. Tools that carry the memory of 100 repairs. Hammerheads polished by 1,000 swings. Wooden handles worn down to a perfect curve by the ghosts of your ancestors' hands. Even the blacksmith's anvil, the sacred rock of your local forge, has dents and chips, worn corners, scorch marks, and a slightly melted spot where someone once dropped molten metal and screamed quietly into the night. And the blacksmith himself? Half-deaf, always covered in soot, and perpetually chewing on something that might be tobacco or might just be dirt with dreams. He can fix your broken axe head. He'll do it by reheating it in the forge, hammering the crack shut, and retempering the metal. But he'll also make it heavier than before. And now your swing will be slightly off. You'll adjust. You always do. This is the secret life of medieval tools. They don't get replaced. They get stories, layers, scars. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you pass them on. Your grandfather's hammer? You're still using it. It's more wood filler than wood. The head has a wobble, but it was his. It remembers his hands, his blisters, his sweat. One day, if you don't die of tetanus or taxation, you might hand it to your son, and he'll fix the handle again, wrap it again, use it to drive the same bent nails into the same warped wood, and the cycle will go on, because in your world, nothing ends. Not really. Not tools. Not effort. Not even this day, which is now dragged into night again while you're still trying to patch your shelf using scrap wood, secondhand nails, and sheer rage. You light another candle. It smells like beeswax and poverty. Your breath fogs in the air. You press the last peg into place. The shelf creaks, but it holds. You hang your tools one by one. Hammer, saw, chisel. Your new, imperfect square. And then, finally, you sit. And for a moment, a short, quiet, entirely medieval moment, you feel something like peace. Just don't breathe too hard, or the shelf might fall again. You wake up to your roof dripping on your face. Again. You try to ignore it. Maybe if you pretend hard enough, it'll stop. But no, the ancient water gods have chosen you once more. A steady, mournful drip right on your nose. It's as if your ceiling is weeping in sympathy for your life choices. You sigh. Loudly. If the walls could roll their eyes, they would. Your blanket, really just a patched-together quilt of wool, straw stuffing, and the smell of damp disappointment, is soaked at one corner. You flip it over. The other side is also damp. Somehow. Don't question it. The laws of physics are not in your favor. You glance around your humble abode, a wooden hut held together by nails, mud, and the medieval equivalent of good enough. Your tools rest in their newly repaired shelf, which has decided, for now, not to rebel again. One win. You'll take it. But the roof. Oh, the roof. That, unfortunately, cannot be fixed with a hammer and sarcasm. That needs proper materials. And you know what that means. You have to venture out. So you roll out of bed, land on your left knee, the crunchy one, mutter something unholy, and begin the process of dressing. Your tunic is stiff from a cold. Your boots are still wet from yesterday. You briefly consider going barefoot, then remember the mud outside smells like pigs and shame. As you stagger outside, your breath puffs in clouds. The sun is barely a suggestion behind a thick wall of gray clouds. It's morning, technically, but you wouldn't call it bright. You wouldn't call it anything, really, except slightly lighter than last night. Your first stop is the neighbor's house. Again. Because you need help. Again, not emotional help. Nobody had time for feelings in the 1300s. Just practical, roof-fixing kind of help. Your neighbor, a man whose name might be Gerald or that guy with the limp, greets you with a grunt. You grunt back. This is peak medieval small talk. You explain the problem. He nods, spits, offers you a bundle of spare thatch. Thatch, by the way, is the medieval answer to everything. Leaking roof? Thatched it. Insulation? Thatch. Want to hide something from the taxmen? Stick it in the thatch and deny everything. The problem with thatch is that it breaks down. Birds steal it. Rain rots it. Children climb on it. You climb on it. It collapses. Rinse and repeat. So off you go, armed with a pitchfork, twine, and a prayer, to do what must be done. Climb your groaning, grody roof and patch the holes before the next storm decides to baptize your face again. And there, crawling across the slope of your own thatch like some kind of medieval spider, you discover yet another tragedy. Your ladder has snapped a rung. Again. You stare at it, as if glaring hard enough might fix it. Spoiler, it does not. You are not a wizard. Just a wet, tired peasant with a pile of wet straw, a dream, and chronic lower back pain. You sigh, again, it's kind of your thing now, and climb down. You drag the broken ladder inside and lay it across your bench. You inspect it. The rung is completely rotted through, probably from that time you left it outside for 6 straight months because you were busy trying not to starve. You'll have to replace it. But before that happens, let's take a little detour. Because this is where things get historically weird. In the Middle Ages, even a ladder was a valuable object. You didn't just chuck a broken one away. You fixed it. Again. And again. Until it resembled a ladder only in theory. Some ladders were so old, so over-repaired, and so emotionally attached to their original structure that they looked like Frankenstein's garden accessory. One leg longer than the other. Rungs mismatched, nailed in at drunken angles. You used it anyway. So you pick a straightish branch. Something vaguely resembling the rung it's meant to replace. You trim it down with your trusty knife, the one whose blade is now half its original length, because sharpening is life and death and you're closer to the ladder. You notch it, fit it in place, tap it with a mallet. The ladder groans like it remembers every fall you've ever taken. You reinforce it with some leather strapping and a few swears. Then, up you go. And here, while clinging to your rooftop like a shivering squirrel, you find yourself contemplating the sheer scale of medieval improvisation. Because tools weren't just tools. They were puzzles. Every part had a second life, a backup plan, a reincarnation strategy. Let's talk about broken blades. Knife blades, axe heads, even scythe edges. They chipped. They snapped. They cracked from overuse or poor tempering. What did you do? You ground them down. You turned a broken knife into a small carving tool. An old axe became a wedge. A snapsaw could be repurposed into shims, hinges, or terrifying rustic jewelry if you were feeling creative and unconcerned with tetanus. The metal wasn't thrown out. Metal was sacred. In a time when mining iron was like squeezing blood from a rock, you saved every last shard. You melted it down, recast it, rearmored it. Or, more often, you just reshaped it into something else and pretended that was the plan all along. There's even records, no joke, of people using broken shears to make lockpicks. Which raises more questions than it answers, frankly. Back to your rooftop escapade. You stuffed the hole with straw, tied it down with twine, and stomped it with your feet until it felt probably secure. You climb down, test your ladder again, it wobbles ominously, and step back to admire your handiwork. The roof now looks slightly less terrible, which is all you can ask for in this life. And while you're admiring your very temporary victory, you hear it. The faintest crack. From behind you. You turn. Slowly. Your shovel has fallen. Again. And this time, the handle didn't survive. You pick it up. It split clean down the middle, like a walnut under a judge's gavel. Of course. Naturally. Because it's Tuesday, and the medieval gods hate you specifically. So once again, you are summoned to your bench. You place the broken shovel before you like a wounded animal. You consider your options. Replace the handle? Yes. Carve a new one? Maybe. Find a sturdy branch and shape it with your knife? But wait, the knife's edge is dull. So now you need to sharpen your knife so you can make a handle, so you can fix your shovel, so you can finish digging, so you can rebuild your compost pit, so you can grow vegetables, so you don't die of malnutrition before winter. Do you see the cycle? It's a never-ending loop of suffering, splinters, and slightly warped measurements. You get out your whetstone. It's smooth, worn down to a nub. You spit on it, because that's the closest thing to oil you can spare. You sharpen the blade slowly, carefully. The rasp of metal on stone fills the room. There's something almost meditative about it. Or there would be, if your back didn't hurt and your nose wasn't still dripping from roof water. Eventually, the knife is sharp enough to threaten someone. You carve a new handle for your shovel. You wedge it in, bind it, sand it, swing it a few times to test the grip. And there it is, a functioning shovel. It took 3 hours. And now it's almost sundown. Congratulations, you can now dig the hole you meant to dig yesterday, and you've only aged emotionally by 5 years. But here's the real kicker, none of this is unusual. This is just life. Every task leads to another. Every fix reveals another crack. Every improvement uncovers a hidden rot. And yet, you persist. Because that's what medieval people did. They didn't have replacement parts. They had imagination, and desperation, and calluses. Broken tools weren't trash, they were challenges. You mended. You reinvented. You cursed a lot. And at the end of the day, after patching your roof, rebuilding your ladder, replacing your shovel handle, and sharpening your knife, you sit on your stool. The fire crackles. Your tools are hanging up, at least for now. Your hands ache. Your knees click. Your roof still leaks a little. But you're here. And so are your tools. Broken. Rebuilt. And ready to break again tomorrow. You wake up to the sound of your neighbor yelling at his goat. Again. Not just any goat. His goat. The one that screams like it's being exorcised every time the sun rises. It's unclear whether this goat is cursed, or if it's just responding appropriately to the general vibe of the 14th century. Either way, it's loud, it's angry, and it's the unofficial village alarm clock. You sit up in bed. Something in your spine clicks. Or cracks. Possibly both. You're not sure anymore. You just sort of get used to the idea that everything from the neck down is either sore, bruised, or some flavor of permanently off. You shuffle to the door, open it, stare into the damp, gray void that is another perfectly average morning in medieval Europe. And then you see it. Your plow. Your plow is broken. You take a long, slow breath through your nose. Inhale. Hold it. Release. You stare at the shattered yoke. It snapped at the center. Splinters are sticking out like it exploded from stress, which it did. The stress of being pulled by a particularly enthusiastic ox named Gerald, who has no understanding of moderation and the patience of a wet sponge. Now, you might be thinking, well, just fix it. Ah, sweet summer child. Fixing a broken medieval plow is like trying to rebuild a refrigerator using driftwood and blind optimism. First of all, this is not just a stick with wheels. A plow is your livelihood. It's your food. It's your taxes. It's the only thing standing between you and the slow, scenic route to starvation. Second, a plow isn't just one thing. It's a Frankensteinian mess of wood, iron, nails, wedges, twine, and years of increasingly unhinged improvisations. That yoke? It was already mended twice with patches from an old wagon axle and a strip of cowhide you borrowed from the tannery. The blade? A third-hand iron scrap that used to be part of a door hinge and still has a faint smell of rust and regret. You walk over to assess the damage. The ox is chewing cud nearby, with the unbothered expression of someone who definitely did this, but refuses to acknowledge it. Gerald looks at you, blinks slowly, and farts. You sigh. Your signature move. Here's the thing about a broken plow, you can't afford to replace it. Not financially. Not logistically. There's no medieval Amazon Prime. There's not even medieval shipping. If you want a new plow part, you walk 3 villages over, find a blacksmith who isn't dead or drunk, and trade your soul, or, more likely, chickens, for a chunk of iron that might arrive by next harvest. So instead, you improvise. Again, you drag the broken yoke to your workbench. The same bench that's been your operating table for everything from shoe soles to window shutters to emergency dental procedures. You lay it flat. Inspect the break. Classic shear crack. probably from too much force and too little maintenance. So, medieval life in a nutshell. You look for a replacement beam. The pile of maybe usable wood in the corner groans under its own weight. You dig through it like an archaeologist, uncovering layers of disappointment. You find something. It's not quite straight, but it's thick enough, long enough, and doesn't smell too rotten. Close enough. You begin shaping it. Slowly. Methodically. This takes hours. Your tools are basic. Your saw is dull. Your hands are cramping. Your knees have gone from mild ache to open rebellion. You take breaks to stretch, which does nothing. You drink water, which might be questionable. You keep going anyway. By midday, your hands are covered in blisters, sawdust, and the kind of grime that might qualify as a new life form. You finally slot the new beam into place, tie it with leather strips, hammer wedges in to hold it firm, and test the strength by leaning your entire body weight on it. It holds. Miraculously. You high-five yourself mentally. Now comes the hard part, reshoeing the plow blade. Because remember, medieval iron doesn't come pre-cut. You can't go to the forge and say, "Hey, I need a new blade. Can I get it in carbon steel with ergonomic curvature?" Nope. You heat the old blade in the fire, pray it doesn't crack, and use your anvil, a lumpy iron slab you found in a ditch 5 years ago, to hammer it back into shape. Each strike sends vibrations up your arm like you're trying to break up with your bones by force. The fire is too hot, then too cold, then too smoky. Your hair smells like despair. You hammer anyway. Eventually, the blade is vaguely straight. It might even cut something. You wedge it back into the plow, tighten the bolts with a wrench made of wood and sarcasm, and give it a hopeful push. It rolls. Barely. Success. Until the back axle groans like an opera singer dying slowly, and a wooden peg falls off with a cheerful plink. Of course. You crawl underneath the plow like a medieval mechanic. There are no gloves. No overalls. Just you, your tunic, and a very deep suspicion that you're about to swallow a spider. You reattach the peg with some twine. Reinforce it with a scrap of bone. Yes, actual bone. It's medieval times, nothing is wasted. Tie everything tighter than your will to live. And then, finally, you stand. Your back protests. Your legs ache. Your arms feel like soup. But the plow is standing. And not only that, it's plowable. Which is good. Because now you have to go plow an entire field. So you hook Gerald back up, carefully, gently, with the resigned fear of someone who knows just how destructive that ox can be, and you begin the long, slow process of dragging the plow through your damp, stubborn soil. It takes hours. You sweat. You swear. You trip over rocks. Gerald farts. Again. But the soil turns. Row by row. Until the sun begins to set behind the hills and the sky turns a color best described as muddy lavender. And when it's done, when your field is roughly ready for planting, you unhook the plow. You lean against it. And you realize something very important. Every single part of that tool has been replaced. Every bolt, every board, every blade. Which means, it's not the same plow you started with years ago. Not even close. This is the ship of Theseus, but for farming. The philosophical paradox where something is entirely rebuilt piece by piece. But is it still the same object? Well, yes. Because you still call it the plow. And you still hate it with every fiber of your being. So that makes it real. And here's the thing, this was normal. Medieval people didn't have throwaway culture. There was no such thing as just buy a new one. You used what you had. You stretched it. Reinvented it. Resurrected it. If a tool was broken, it became a different tool. A cracked bucket became a plant pot. A snapped pitchfork became a rake. A ruined pot was hammered flat and used as a shovel. Or a lid. Or a doorstop. Or armor. Probably all free. In a pinch. Nothing was trash. Everything was something else, waiting to be rediscovered. So as the stars appear and Gerald trudges back to the barn to plot his next act of sabotage, you drag your Frankenstein plow inside. You hang up your tools. You stretch. Your hands are numb. Your face is streaked with ash. Your boots smell like feet and eternity. But for now, everything is fixed. Just in time to break again tomorrow. You wake up to silence. Which is worrying. No screaming goat. No squabbling chickens. No neighbor yelling at the wind like it owes him rent. Just pure, ominous quiet. Your eyes snap open. You sit up. Your blanket, which, let's be honest, is just a burlap sack that seen things, is cold, damp, and clinging to you like a needy ex. You listen again. Still nothing. And that's when you realize the horrifying truth. It snowed last night. You peer out the crooked wooden window, the one with the crack that whistled all winter, and there it is. The ground is white. Your roof is white. Your tool shed? White. Gerald the ox? Just a lumpy, judgmental snow blob. You sigh. A long, slow exhale of exhaustion and resentment. Winter. Winter in medieval Europe is like nature decided to personally punish you for being alive. Everything hurts. Everything is cold. Everything is broken. And your tools? They've had enough. The cold makes the wood shrink. The iron cracks. Everything freezes, including your hopes, dreams, and that small container of pickled onions you were saving for a special occasion. You drag yourself out of bed. Your feet hit the floor with the enthusiasm of a man stepping onto a frozen sponge. Your boots are stiff as boards. Your cloak smells like mildew and desperation. But there's no time to complain. Well, no time to do anything but complain, actually. You just have to do it while fixing something. Because last night, during the snowstorm, the hinges on your barn door snapped clean off. Now, this wouldn't be a huge deal if the barn didn't also contain your food stores, your tools, your livestock, Gerald, your last remaining sense of purpose. So, you wrap yourself in a second cloak, grab a lantern, and trudge outside. It's cold. Not modern cold, where you can duck into a Starbucks and order a latte with oat milk. This is bite for your bones, freeze your eyelashes. You might lose it cold. Your breath steams in front of your face like a dragon trying to file a complaint. The snow crunches underfoot, thick, icy, and entirely uninterested in your comfort. You reach the barn. The door is off its hinges. Just lying there, on the ground, looking smug. Inside, your chickens are huddled together in a fluffy ball of mutual loathing. Gerald gives you a look that says, well, you did this. And now you have a new problem. How do you fix iron hinges in the dead of winter? Because remember, you don't just run to the hardware store. You are the hardware store. You and your half-frozen toolbox full of things that used to be better. You pick up the hinge. It's cracked straight through, metal fatigue. Common in winter. Iron expands and contracts with the cold. Over time, that stress builds. And then, snap. Now, medieval hinges weren't exactly precision instruments. They were handmade, usually by the village blacksmith, using materials that varied between a sort of okay and recycled from a battlefield 3 towns over. Yours? Yours were made from old wagon iron and hope. And you know what that means? You're going to have to forge a new one. In the snow. With a half-dead fire pit. And tools that are older than most countries. So you do what any reasonable peasant would do. You go back inside, stoke your hearth, and begin to rebuild your forge. Because the one in the barn, naturally, is also broken. The bellows rotted last month. You'd meant to fix it. But then the shovel broke. And then the ladder. And then you got stuck in a ditch for a day because of a tragic turnip incident. Don't ask. You take a deep breath. Look around your cottage. This is your materials list. 1 cracked anvil. A small hammer, slightly warped. A bent pair of tongs. A chunk of iron that used to be a horseshoe. 2 socks, unrelated, but they've fused with the floor now and might be useful insulation. You sigh, yes, again, and get to work. First step, you reignite the forge, which is just a stone-lined pit filled with ash, charcoal, and disappointment. You pump the bellows manually, your left arm doing most of the work, your right arm already preparing to file a grievance. The fire catches. Kind of. You coax it into life with careful feeding and a lot of gentle insults. You place the iron chunk into the coals and wait. This is not a fast process. It takes hours. You pass the time by staring into the fire and questioning your life choices. You consider becoming a monk, or a hermit, or maybe just a very still rock. Eventually, the iron glows red. You take it out with the tongs, place it on the anvil, and begin hammering. Each strike sends a jolt up your arms. The iron flattens, slowly, like the world's worst pancake. You shape it into something vaguely hinge-like. You quench it in snow. It hisses. It cracks. You scream internally. So you do it again. Heat. Hammer. Shape. Cool. The second time, it holds. You drill holes with a hand crank auger that you inherited from a man who may or may not have invented the concept of suffering. You fashion pegs from spare wood. You test the hinge. It moves. You want to cry. You don't have time. You drag the hinge to the barn. Reattach the door. Slam it shut against the wind. The chickens cluck in approval. Gerald nods solemnly. You've done it. You've conquered the winter hinge crisis of whatever year it is. But wait, there's more. Because as you return to the house, triumphant, ready to bask in the warmth of your fire and the dubious flavor of cabbage soup, you hear another sound. The unmistakable crack of your spade handle breaking. Again. This is the fourth time this month. You stare at the tool shed, at the broken spade, at the remains of last week's wheelbarrow, at the rusted pile of useful bits that you keep telling yourself you'll sort through. And you realize something profound. Your tools are dying faster than you are. But you can't stop. Because every tool is part of a living ecosystem of function and failure. The spade needs fixing so you can dig out the drainage. The drainage needs clearing so the path doesn't flood. The path leads to the grain store. The grain store feeds you. You feed Gerald. Gerald plows the field. And the field grows the barley. And the barley becomes, well, more food. Or ale. Probably ale. So you pick up the spade. You return to the bench. You begin carving a new handle from a twisted piece of ash wood. It's not perfect. Nothing is. Not here. Not in this century. But it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to last until tomorrow. And that's the rhythm of it. That's the hum of medieval life. Things break. You fix them. Then they break again. You fix them again. Until your hands are calloused. Until your knees creak. Until your eyes can identify a crack in iron by candlelight. Until every tool in your shed has your sweat, your blood, and at least one swear word carved invisibly into its surface. And when you finally collapse into bed, the silence returns, broken only by the wind, the soft creak of timber, and the very distant sound of Gerald farting in the dark. Welcome to winter. You're going to love it here. You wake up to the sound of a monk knocking on your door. That's never good news. He's not smiling. Monks never smile when it's about your taxes, or the roof of the abbey collapsing, or when they've decided that you, yes you, are going to help them fix the cathedral's west-facing flying buttress because you once successfully replaced a door hinge and word got around. You open the door. He's shivering, soaked from the morning mist, holding what appears to be a broken wheelbarrow wheel and an expression that says, "I've been sent by God," but also Brother Cedric, who stepped in a gopher hole. And so, before your brain can even reach for a coherent protest, you've agreed to help repair the monastic tools. Because that's how medieval favors work. One moment you're patching your own fence, the next you're being voluntold into ecclesiastical labor. Now, monastery tools are a special breed. They're theoretically holy, made by hand, passed down through generations of bald men in robes who believe hammers are best swung while chanting psalms in Latin. They're made of wood, iron, and something suspiciously close to pride. So when they break, they break dramatically. You follow the monk through muddy fields and over stone bridges, slick with moss, until you reach the abbey. It's bigger than you remember, probably because it looms out of the fog like a stone whale, complete with gargoyles, crumbling buttresses, and the kind of drafty corridors that make you wonder why anyone thought this was a good place to live voluntarily. You're escorted into the tool shed. If shed is the right word. It's more of a sanctified cave where tools go to die. The monk gestures to a pile of broken items and recites their names like he's reading a list of sins. 2 sides, snapped to the haft because Brother Jerome tried to mow ice. 1 bellows, burnt, which is impressive. A winch, jammed after someone tried to lift a cow. And of course, the infamous wheelbarrow wheel, now looking like a sad wooden donut. He then disappears, presumably to pray for your success. You sit on a splintery stool and sigh for the 73rd time this week. Let's start with the wheel. Monastic wheelbarrows are overbuilt, made from thick oak and gilt. They're designed to haul things like stones, barrels of wine, and occasionally monks who've lost a theological debate and need transporting to bed. This wheel? It's cracked. Deeply. And not cleanly. No, this thing shattered like it insulted the Virgin Mary. So you examine the hub. The wood is splintered, the iron rim is warped, and the axle pin is missing entirely. Just gone. Maybe it rolled under a shelf. Maybe a novice took it to stir soup. You begin by removing what's left of the spokes. One by one. Each one groans like a medieval ghost. You save the ones that aren't fully ruined, because you always save parts. One day, you might need a spoke, and you'll thank your past self for hoarding like a peasant squirrel. You carve a new hub from a block of wood the monks provide, which they claim is blessed ash. It smells more like moldy pine, but who are you to argue with God's lumber? You shape it carefully, using a draw knife and a rasp, until it's roundish. Nothing in medieval carpentry is truly round. Just approximately not square. Then comes the iron rim. It's bent, twisted, rusted. Like your back. You heat it gently in the monastery's forge. The fire here is cleaner than yours, probably because it's tended by novices with nothing better to do and lots of guilt to burn off. You straighten the rim on a stone slab, hammering rhythmically while a nearby monk sings Dies Irae in a minor key. It's oddly motivating. After hours of shaping, adjusting, swearing under your breath, and burning your hand just once, the wheel is back together. You spin it experimentally. It squeaks, but it rolls, which is more than can be said for most of your joints. Next, the scythes. Both halves are broken. Not cracked, snapped. One is clean across the middle, the other splintered like firewood. Apparently, monks are known for gentle tool use. You salvage the blades, still sharp, still slightly bloodstained, possibly pig, possibly Brother Cedric, no one's talking, and you find 2 new handles. Ash wood again. Strong, flexible, reliable. Like a good ox or a tavern widow. You shave them down to shape using your plane. Fit the tangs of the blades into the wood, reinforce with iron rivets, and wrap the grip in cured leather for comfort. You try a test swing. It whistles through the air with that satisfying "don't mess with me" sound. You place them neatly by the door, praying that whoever uses them next respects their power. Then you face your greatest challenge yet. The bellows. Now, bellows are deceptively complex. They're made from wood boards joined by leather, with a nozzle at one end. They suck in air, compress it, and shoot it into the fire. They are the lungs of any forge. This one is dead. The leather is torn. The boards are warped. The nozzle is missing entirely, possibly stolen by a mouse to use as a tiny, evil megaphone. You sigh. Deeply. Again. Replacing bellows, leather is like trying to reskin a stubborn cow. First, you soak the new leather to make it pliable. Then, you stretch it across the frame, carefully aligning it to the boards, punching holes, stitching with wax cord, and sealing the edges with tallow. It takes hours. Your fingers cramp. Your eyes blur. The monk comes back and offers you barley bread and weak ale. You accept. It tastes like penance. But finally, the bellows is reassembled. You test it. It breathes. A puff of air hisses from the nozzle like a dragon whispering secrets. Success. You sit back, exhausted. The tools are repaired. The wheel spins. The sides shine. The bellows sigh like a tired god. The monk bows deeply, thanks you in the name of Saint Benedict, and offers a blessing that definitely isn't payment, but you accept it anyway, because that's how things work. As you trudge home through the snow, every muscle aching, every joint grinding, you reflect on something strange. The tools here aren't just objects. They're sacred. Not in the blessed by relics way, although possibly, you never know with monks, but in the purpose they hold. These aren't just things, they're rituals. A scythe isn't just for cutting wheat. It's for feeding the village, paying tithes, giving offerings. The wheelbarrow isn't just for hauling manure. It's for building the abbey, carrying stones for God, and sometimes transporting small saints who are too tired to walk. And the bellows? They breathe fire into the forge, which makes nails, which builds doors, which open into the chapel where everyone comes to pray. So every broken tool, every cracked handle, warped rim, or frayed strap is more than just wear and tear. It's spiritual decay. And fixing it is divine labor, even if it leaves you covered in soot, sap, and the faint smell of pickled fish. You reach home, collapse onto your straw mattress, pull the burlap sack over your head. Your fingers are blistered. Your clothes are stiff. Your boots are permanently damp. But somewhere out there, a wheel is turning. A blade is cutting. A fire is roaring. And you, yes, you, put it all back together. Sleep, dear craftsman. Tomorrow, something else will break. But tonight, you rest. You wake up to the sound of rain. But not normal rain. No, this is medieval rain. The kind that seeps into your soul. The kind that soaks through your roof, your clothes, and your worldview. The kind that's less gentle shower and more God is doing laundry and forgot to turn off the rinse cycle. You peel back your wool blanket, which, as usual, is damp and smells like goat. Not your goat. Just a general goat essence that permeates all medieval fabric. The fire's out. The air is cold. Your bones ache. And your thatch roof is leaking, again, right into your only dry bowl. You think about fixing it. But then you remember you lent your ladder to your cousin. Who broke it? Because of course he did. Because everything in your life, your tools, your roof, your relatives, is in a constant state of near-functional decay. You roll out of bed, step into a puddle that shouldn't be there, and start your day the same way every medieval peasant does. By assessing what's broken today. Your roof? Obviously. Your hoe? Bent. Again. Your cartwheel? Slightly less round than yesterday. And your pitchfork, the one tool you actually like, the one that's perfectly balanced and worn into your hand like a natural extension of your soul, is missing a tine. Just snapped clean off. You suspect your neighbor borrowed it. You also suspect he used it to fight off a wild boar or pry open his cheese cellar. You're not sure. You don't ask. He doesn't talk about it. Instead, you go outside. The sky is gray. The mud is thick. Your boots are barely holding together with scraps of twine and passive aggression. You make your way to the shed. Ah yes, the shed. It leans slightly to the left. The door creaks like it's considering retirement. A family of mice has declared independence in the back corner, and the woodworm are unionizing. You step inside and take stock. Today's inventory of broken things includes a cracked mallet, a rake with teeth like your cousin's after his cider fight, a leather strap that snapped during your last attempt to tie down a sack of barley, and an oil lamp that no longer lamps. You sit down on your bench and do what any medieval person would do in this situation. You start repurposing. Because in the medieval world, broken doesn't mean garbage. It means new opportunity to invent a tool that shouldn't exist. Take that cracked mallet, for instance. It's useless for pounding pegs now. One more swing and it'll explode like a wooden grenade. But it's perfect for wedging open doors or maybe very gentle executions if you're in a bad mood. The rake? Missing half its teeth. Yes. But turn it sideways, and suddenly, it's a potato sorter. You don't sort your potatoes, but it's nice to know you could. And that leather strap? Too weak for heavy lifting. But cut into thinner strips, oiled and cured. It makes great lashings for tool handles or emergency sandal straps when your footwear gives up mid-harvest. This is how medieval repair works. You don't fix everything. You reimagine it. You reassign it. You force it to take on a new job it was never meant to do, because tools are like people, stubborn, durable, and mostly running on spite. You take your broken pitchfork, for example. A missing tine isn't ideal, but it's still got two left. That's enough for flipping hay, or poking at things you don't want to touch, or gesturing dramatically when you yell about taxes. Later, if you get lucky, you'll replace the broken tine using a nail, some wire, and probably gilt. But for now, you improvise. Improvisation is the medieval lifestyle. Your hammer has been rebuilt 3 times. The head is original. The handle was once a chair leg. And the wedge keeping it together is a piece of bone from an unlucky chicken. Your axe is similarly complicated. The blade? A repurposed plowshare. The handle? A polished branch from that tree you hit your head on last spring. The binding? Worn cloth from your third-best tunic. You don't throw tools away. You resurrect them. But sometimes a tool dies. Not dramatically. Just slowly. The saw, for instance. Its teeth are dull. You file them down so many times they're more suggestion than serration. The handle is cracked. It no longer cuts, it just encourages the wood until it gives up out of pity. You try to revive it. You heat the blade. Reforge the edge. Rewrap the handle with twine. But it's no good. This saw has cut its last log. So you do the unthinkable. You retire it. Not by throwing it away. No, you honor it. You hang it on the wall above the hearth, next to your grandfather's spoon and the skeleton of your first sling. It becomes a relic. A monument to all the splinters, all the boards, all the endless hours of cutting and sweating and occasionally bleeding. And you say a few words under your breath, not because you're sentimental, but because that saw understood you. You move on. You focus on what can still be saved. Like your chisel. Its blade is chipped, the handle scorched from a forge mishap you still don't talk about, but you can't afford to lose it. So you do something borderline reckless. You visit the traveling tinker. Now, tinkers are eccentric. They travel from village to village, carrying bags full of metal bits, mysterious powders, and the faint smell of boiled rats. But they fix things. For a price. You trade him a half-wheel of cheese, 3 eggs, and a suspiciously old carrot. He nods, examines your chisel, and without a word, pulls out a stone and begins to sharpen it with a rhythm that sounds like whispering knives. Then he replaces the handle, using bone. Real bone. Probably pig. Possibly not. You don't ask. In 10 minutes, your chisel is reborn. You thank him. He nods. You ask how long he'll be in town. He says, until the moon turns red. Which is not helpful. You go home. You have a working chisel now. It's heavier than before. Unbalanced. A little sinister. But it works. And that's all that matters. Because in this world, function is sacred. A tool that works is more precious than gold. More valuable than bread. More respected than the local priest on bath day. Because when tools work, you work. You build fences. Mend roofs. Shape wood. Cut meat. Carve bowls. Hollow out logs into buckets. You even once made a spoon out of a hoof. Don't ask. It wasn't your finest moment. And as the sun dips below the soggy hills and the rain turns to mist, you stand in your shed, surrounded by the ghosts of broken tools and the quiet pride of things rebuilt. You hang the rake. Set down the pitchfork. Run your fingers over the new chisel. And for one fleeting moment, in the dim glow of your oil lamp, you feel ready. Not for war. Not for glory. Not for adventure. But for tomorrow's long, wet, thankless labor. And that's good enough. You crawl into bed. The roof drips. The fire smokes. Your tools rest beside you, like old friends. And as you drift off, you hear the faintest creak from the shed. Maybe it's the mice. Maybe it's the wind. Or maybe, just maybe, it's your old saw whispering one last "you're welcome." You wake up in the dark. Not because the sun hasn't risen yet. It hasn't, but because the fire has gone out again. And your candle stub has given up on its own existence. It didn't melt so much as resign. You grope around for your tunic, find it soaking in the corner where the roof leaks, and decide you're too tired to care. You put it on anyway. It sticks to your back like a cold pancake of regret. The floor creaks. So do your knees. You open the door and step outside into the dense fog of pre-dawn medieval existence. The kind of fog that feels like it might have thoughts and opinions. You inhale the moist, mold-flavored air and try to ignore the fact that your breath smells like yesterday's onion soup. Or maybe it was onion gruel. Or possibly just onion disappointment. You look down the muddy path toward your workshed. And that's when you see it. A sight that causes your stomach to drop, your eyes to narrow, and your soul to prepare itself for a day of tedious agony. Your plowshare is broken. Again. You know this because it's sitting, crookedly, in the field where your cousin left it, abandoned mid-furrow like a forgotten wheel of cheese at a feast. It snapped. Right through the iron. You didn't even know that was possible. But your cousin has a way of making the impossible possible, especially when it involves tools you love and trust. You trudge across the field, each step squelching like you're stomping through medieval stew. Your boots are now half mud, half sadness. You reach the plow. It's worse than you thought. The share, the metal part that cuts into the soil, is cracked and bent. The wooden beam is splintered, and the yoke chain is twisted into something that looks like it belongs on a cursed wind chime. You crouch and examine the damage. It is comprehensive. So naturally, you prepare for what comes next. The repair. Or, more accurately, the battle. Because fixing a plowshare isn't a chore. It's an ordeal, a spiritual test, a dark pilgrimage into the abyss of metallurgy and misplaced optimism. You drag the entire contraption back to your shed, slowly, with the help of one very annoyed goat and a rope that frays a little more each time you curse under your breath. Inside, you light a small fire and begin. Step 1. Remove the share from the beam. You wedge, pry, and hammer until the rusted bolts give up, and let go with a metallic sigh that might have been a scream in another life. Step 2. Assess the iron. You do this by tapping it with a stone and listening to the sound. Clang, crack, clang, thunk. That last one? That's not a good thunk. It's the sound of defeat. Of brittle, exhausted metal that wants to be reborn as something simpler, like a spoon. But you won't let it. Because plowshares are sacred. Not in the saint's toe bone way, but in the crop survival way. Without it, your field doesn't get turned. Without turned soil, there's no grain. And without grain, there's just famine, rats, and awkward dinner conversations about which sibling looks most edible. So you do what every desperate medieval person does when iron breaks. You go to the smith. Now, your blacksmith is not a man of many words. He communicates mostly through grunts, shrugs, and the occasional eyebrow twitch. He smells like smoke, ash, and poorly made decisions. You arrive at his forge with a broken share wrapped in old cloth, like you're carrying a wounded soldier. He grunts. You nod. He squints. You unwrap the plowshare and present it like an offering to a very sooty god. He inspects it, taps it, snorts. Then he points to his pile of scrap iron. It's less a pile and more a mountain of misfit tools, broken horseshoes, mangled nails, twisted hinges, and one very angry-looking pair of tongs. He picks up a piece that used to be part of a sword and hands it to you. This, apparently, is your new share. You don't ask questions. You trust the process. The forge roars to life. The smith heats the scrap until it glows orange, then pounds it into shape with a hammer that's seen more action than your village militia. Each strike echoes through the air, through your bones, through history itself. The plowshare takes form. A little crooked, a little rough, but undeniably alive again. He quenches it in a barrel of water that hisses like a furious cat. Then, with a grunt of finality, he hands it back to you. You nod. He nods. That's it. No receipt. No paperwork. Just an understanding. You trudge home, the newly forged share wrapped in cloth, still warm. Like bread. Or vengeance. Back in your shed, you attach it to the beam, reinforcing it with new pegs and bindings. You test it in the soil. It bites deep. It turns the earth like butter. If butter were full of rocks and angry worms. You grin. Victory. But only temporary. Because across the room, you notice another tragedy. Your grindstone is wobbling. Now, the grindstone is your pride. It sharpens your blades, your axes, your sense of control. But the wheel is loose on the axle. You remove it. The shaft is worn. The stone chipped. The frame sagging. You patch the frame with leftover oak. Reshim the axle with leather scraps. Reset the wheel. You pedal it. It spins true. For now. Then comes the final disaster of the day. Your buckets. 2 are leaking. One has completely fallen apart. You gather the pieces. Slats of warped wood, iron hoops bent out of shape. You salvage what you can. Replace what you can't. You boil pitch in a pot, slather it onto the inside of the barrel to seal the gaps, and hold your breath because it smells like melted despair. You let it cool. Then fill it with water. No leak. You allow yourself one full nod of satisfaction. It's a good day. By medieval standards, which are, frankly, unimaginably woe. You've fixed a plowshare. Restored a grindstone. Resurrected a bucket. Your back is on fire. Your fingers are stained with soot, grease, and what might be rat blood. You've inhaled enough smoke to qualify as partially cured meat. But you've done it. You didn't go to the market. You didn't buy anything. You didn't throw a single tool away. You just kept making broken things work. Because that's what medieval people do. You don't innovate. You endure. You don't upgrade. You adapt. And as the sun sets over your muddy little world, and the chickens settle into their coop with all the grace of sacks falling off a cart, you lean against your shed, drink stale ale from a repaired mug, and stare at your field. It's ready now. And so are you. Sort of. You'll wake up tomorrow and something else will be broken. A latch. A scythe. Your faith in structural stability. But for now, you sleep. To the sound of wind through thatched roofs, creaking beams, and the quiet, reliable drip of a freshly patched bucket. You wake up again. This time not because of the weather, or the rodents in your ceiling, or the occasional existential panic dream about being drafted into a crusade, but because of something far worse. Your door won't open. Not that it's locked. Locks are for rich people. You barely have hinges. It's just stuck, swollen with moisture. The frame is warped. The latch is jammed. And you, the dignified medieval adult that you are, begin your morning by repeatedly shoulder-checking a warped slab of pine like it owes you money. Eventually, the door gives in with a groan and a splinter. You step outside, victorious and also slightly bruised, into the sweet, musty breath of dawn. The sky is gray, as always. Your neighbor is already out, arguing with his chicken again. You wave. The chicken ignores you. Today is a maintenance day. Not fixing, exactly. Just preserving what hasn't already collapsed. You start with your barn. Calling it a barn is generous. It's a leaning, groaning structure held together with wishful thinking, rusted nails, and a very determined spider in the northeast corner. You press on the main beam. It moves. That's not ideal. You add another support, a log you found near the woods, already halfway rotted, but still firmer than your cousin's logic. You wedge it beneath the frame. It holds, for now. A gust of wind will undo your work, but you've accepted that your barn is basically one sneeze away from becoming barn mulch. You sigh and move on to your ladder. The top rung is missing. You knew this. You forgot again. You remember mid-climb, which is also the moment your shin connects with the splintered stump of the former rung. You nearly descend by falling, but manage to hobble back down with dignity mostly intact and a small wooden dagger embedded in your calf. You fix the rung with a scrap of wood and more twine. You're now out of twine. Add it to the list. You mutter something about moving to the coast and becoming a hermit. Then move on to the next task, sharpening. Everything needs sharpening. Axes, knives, scythes, your wit. But you only have time for the first three. You sit at the grindstone, the one you rescued in the last chapter, and pedal it slowly. Your scythe is dull, which is dangerous. A dull scythe doesn't cut grass. It bends it aggressively and demands it fall over out of respect. You press the blade to the spinning stone. Sparks fly. Smoke rises. You cough, because of course you do, and the edge begins to glisten with renewed menace. You do the same with your kitchen knife, which has been used for everything from cutting bread to trimming leather to, you're pretty sure once, digging a mole out of the garden. It deserves better. You set it carefully aside, freshly honed, like a knight returned from battle. You check your tool hooks next, those little wooden pegs where you hang your implements like weapons on a wall. 3 are missing. 1 is bent. The others are mostly doing their job but have begun to protest via creaking and falling off the wall at 3 a.m., which is always fun. You replace them with new pegs, which means carving new pegs, which means whittling, which means sitting by the shed with a bit of hazelwood and your good carving knife and slowly, patiently shaving the wood into something approximating straightness. You get 3 serviceable pegs and 1 that looks like a cursed finger. You hang it anyway. You clean your tools. You oil the wooden handles with a mixture of animal fat and herbs you don't trust. You scrape the rust off your sickle using a scrap of rough leather and your will to live. You test it on some weeds. It cuts beautifully. You don't even need to cut weeds today. You just wanted to know you could. That's what maintenance is. A series of tiny rituals that remind you that you still control something, in a world where most things are cold, wet, and slightly on fire. You head into the house. There, you find your chair is wobbly again. It only has 3 legs, technically, and the 4th is a pile of bricks. But now one of the actual legs is loose. You flip the chair over and begin the familiar dance of wedging shims, tightening rope bindings, and muttering curses in Latin, just in case the furniture is listening. You fix it. Kind of. It no longer lurches when you sit. It just leans dramatically, like it's pondering the fall of Rome. That's enough. You move onto the roof. You always move onto the roof, because the roof is your nemesis. No matter how often you patch it, replace the thatch, or threaten it with fire and abandonment, it always leaks. Today's leak is near the hearth. You climb up, find the gap, and shove in some fresh straw and dried reeds, tied together with more twine you absolutely do not have. You use hair instead. Yes, your own. It works. Kind of. You'll forget it's there and panic later when you see it dangling from the ceiling like a cursed souvenir. But at least it's dry now. The rest of the afternoon is a blur of grinding grain, checking the fences, and restacking the woodpile, which collapsed because your cousin tried to climb it. Again, you collect your tools. Hang them back in their places. You feel the quiet satisfaction of someone who has maintained the illusion of stability. You haven't fixed everything, but you've delayed disaster by another 24 hours. And in the medieval world, that's called a triumph. As the sun sets behind the lopsided trees, you sit on your newly less wobbly chair next to your newly less leaky fire and look around. The scythe is sharp. The roof is holding. The barn is mostly upright. You sip your Waterdale and exhale. You've made it through another day without total collapse, which, in your time period, is the closest thing to luxury you'll ever experience. You hear an odd creak from outside. You assume it's the wind. It's not. It's your ladder falling over again. You'll get to it tomorrow. Maybe. Because tonight, you sleep with your tools polished, your chair slightly more comfortable, and the knowledge that yes, everything will fall apart again. But not today. Today, you kept the medieval entropy at bay. You close your eyes and drift off.